Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for, whoops, I clicked the wrong thing. We're all getting used to this. We've got up next, we have Martin Omander. Martin works for Google in Mountain View, California. His job in the developer relations team is to help developers build better software and improve Google's cloud platform and make it even better for that purpose. In his spare time, he manages to sneak in some programming. Before Google, Martin worked at a string of startups in Silicon Valley as a software engineer. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Martin. And whenever I mention that I get to see Martin, my wife says, "Oh, he has the best shoes." So, and I always wonder, I don't want to put you on the spot, but in these days of working fully remote, does Martin still put on the snazziest shoes that I've ever seen? You can just say yes or no.
Most days I don't even wear pants.
See, that's good. Well, we're thrilled to have you. Thanks, Martin. I'll turn it over.
All right. Thank you, Lloyd. Yeah, it's so good to, I was saying before, it's so good to be able to speak at more events, although I'm very sad that I don't get to see you guys in person. This Remo platform, really cool. I really liked it. Here we go. All right, I'm going to talk about scaling up your cloud application. And this will be in 4 major chunks. So I'm going to, let's see, start there. So I'm going to take a pause after each of these 4 chunks of content here and see if there are any questions. I understand that people type questions in the chat here on the side. So Lloyd, I can't see it, but when I make a break and I will ask you, perhaps you can tell me if there are questions in there, and we'll do that 4 times during the talk.
Sounds great, Martin.
All right, excellent. So this talk is about scaling up your cloud application. First, we'll talk about this. This is me. So I was born and raised in Sweden. So when we were still traveling, I used to sort of feel right at home in parts of the Midwest. It felt like the most Swedish part of the US. I lived in Silicon Valley these last 20 years. I'm in Mountain View right now, actually. Google main office is 1.5 miles in that direction, but I'm not allowed to go there. My badge doesn't work. They turned off everybody's badges. They don't want people in the office. Worked at startups, worked at Google, cloud developer advocate. I've been doing serverless computing. That is my passion, because life is too short to deal with maintaining servers. All right, so we as developers, we are still trying to figure out what this cloud computing thing is. And that includes me, that includes everybody, people who say that they're experts and know this cloud computing thing. I would suggest that maybe they're not telling the whole truth, because cloud computing is still new, right? It's like 10, 15 years old. So a lot of these best practices we don't have yet. And we are sort of mixing different things together, and sometimes it blows up in our faces, and sometimes it works great. So I'm going to talk about some ways I blew things up and some ways where I was lucky and things that worked out right. And maybe you can take inspiration from that as you're growing your cloud application. So this talk is about how to cope when your cloud application grows in size and complexity. When I say cloud application, I mean like a backend for a web app or a mobile backend. That's what my experience is in. And these are hard-earned lessons from my own mistakes. Plenty of these will be in the presentation, and mistakes that I've seen with customers make, and with names redacted to protect the innocent and guilty. This is not about tuning your app's performance. There is that whole other way of scaling, right? Technology-wise. I won't talk about that today. I won't talk about writing the client code. As a matter of fact, I won't show any code at all. All right, so that's what the talk will be about. Please enter your questions as things pop up, and at 4 times in the presentation, I'll make breaks, and Lloyd can read out those questions, and I'll try to answer them as we go along. This helps me. It helps me remind myself that I'm not a crazy person talking to myself in a home office in Mountain View, but there are real people out there. Okay, so first of all, there is one quote I love by Marshall McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan, if you don't know, he was a sort of prophet of the information age. He basically predicted pretty much what we're doing on the internet, except he predicted it in the 50s and 60s, before there even was an internet. And one of the things he said was, the social and educational patterns latent in automation are those of self-employment and artistic autonomy. So obviously you can tell from the language here that he was an academic. What he's saying, I think, is automation can lead to artistic autonomy. And we are engineers, but we're also artists, especially when we're working in a new area like cloud computing, where you can be more of an artist in cloud computing than in, say, road construction, that is more well known. So automation leads to artistic autonomy. What does that mean? Well, I've seen two ways of doing this. Automate monitoring, but in the right way. There are plenty of ways to do it wrong. Automate testing, also in the right way. If you do that, you can buy yourself artistic autonomy. So let's start with the first one, monitoring. So I built a beautiful dashboard for one of the cloud apps I built. And then the app broke. There was something, some query started running long, or something was problematic with the database. I don't remember. These beautiful dashboards that I spent so much time on didn't help at all. So monitoring is nice, but if you build a dashboard and you think that is monitoring, you don't actually have monitoring. You think you will check with these reports, and you think you will check maybe even these dashboards and things. You will, but over time you'll check them less and less often, and you certainly won't check them every minute of the day. So the way to do monitoring right is, dashboards is nice, and maybe build those eventually. Don't do what I did and start with dashboards. You start, and this is super simple. If you run on Google Cloud, you install the Google Cloud mobile app on your phone. It will tell you if new errors appear. And I assume that the other cloud platforms have similar things. Super simple step. If there are new errors in your cloud app, you will get a notification. Then as you go on, you can read up about cloud monitoring, setting up alerts, custom alerts for your cloud project. But alerts is the way. Dashboards are nice, but they come second or third. Next is automating testing. And we've all been to many conference talks that talk about how great it is to automate testing. And I had automated a bunch of testing in one cloud app that I built. Lots of unit tests. But what I noticed was that those unit tests didn't catch any of the actual errors that users ran into in production. Testing is a rabbit hole of infinite depth. And you can test, and you can spend all your time figuring out what testing frameworks to use and so on. And you should, of course, add unit tests to risky code. But the most important, I think, is adding end-to-end tests for critical user journeys through your application. That is where the action is. That is where you get the good alerts, not in the unit tests. I actually don't write many unit tests nowadays. I try to focus more on end-to-end tests. So the way to do this, of course, right, is to find a robust end-to-end, preferably no-code testing tool. I've seen a few that were very expensive. I'm still searching for a really good one that is truly no-code. If you find one, please tell me. I have a few candidates that I'm testing out right now. But end-to-end testing is where the action is, in my opinion. All right. So that was the first part, the first quarter of the talk. Lloyd, do we have any questions in the chat?
There haven't been any questions come up just yet. I'm really intrigued by a lot of what you're saying. Can you take a second and say, or choose to, or abstain? What are the tools that you're finding as good candidates for an end-to-end testing tool?
Right. There was this Danish company. Shoot, I forget what they were called now. Dang. I should have put that on the slide. Yeah, a Danish company that basically had built, you sort of drew a flow chart. I mean, I can code, right? And so can many of you, perhaps most of you, dear viewers, but coding is, whatever you write in code tends to be kind of brittle. And of course, we all know for every 100 lines of code we write, we produce 3 bugs on average. So less code means fewer bugs. Yeah.
And then the other question that I had as you were talking was, how do you balance the right amount of notifications so that those don't become noise?
Yeah, this is really hard to do. Yeah. I don't have a good answer. That is one of the great unsolved questions of our time. Cool. If there are no more questions, I'll go on with the second quarter here.
We do have one.
Oh, we do have one.
In here. What would the end-to-end user story testing look like from a tool perspective? Manual steps, Cypress, Protractor, other?
Yeah, Cypress, Protractor, I love those things. They, in my opinion, it takes too much work to write tests in them, and the tests are too brittle. I think it's the best we have for now. So we should use that until we find something better. This truly, no code, end-to-end, robust tool. But those are great tools. It's just unfortunate that it requires too much work and the tests are too brittle. We have to rewrite them over and over again.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. Yeah, so for the second quarter, we will talk about this guy, Franz Kafka. He lived and wrote in the 1920s in Prague. He said about productivity. Cloud computing, of course, wasn't around 100 years ago, but what he said about productivity holds true. Productivity is being able to do things that you were never able to do before. So we should look out for the true productivity gains that, not just save us, 2 seconds by adding a semicolon at the end of lines of code or something like that, but like productivity game changers. And I think that there are 2 that I've seen, at least, that were sort of came out of left field for me that I was surprised by. First off, busy isn't always the same as productive. We've heard this, but I'll go into this in a bit more detail. And then understand and love IAM. We'll dive into that. Okay, busy isn't always the same as productive. We do this as developers all the time, and I try to remind myself not to do it, but I keep doing it. The other day, I read up on virtual private clouds. This is really cool technology. You can sort of build your own data center within Google Cloud, so you're isolated from the rest of Google Cloud. I almost started building stuff using that, but then I realized this wouldn't add much value to the users. So I gave up, which was good, because I could have stayed productive on that for weeks with questionable benefit for users. And we as engineers, we're used to solving the problems that we know how to solve. So for some of you, I know that some of you are excellent at setting up virtual machines and configuring Linux just right. Others, you're amazing at setting up networks and making sure that only the right computers can talk to the right other computers. I wonder, and we tend then to do these things like set up virtual machines or configuring networks, or in my case, I tend to futz around too much with the UI. Or new tech, like I get distracted by shiny new tech. So think about what is your comparative advantage. Are you better than everybody else at setting up virtual machines? Yeah, then you should work on that. Although chances are you aren't. Then you should let somebody else do that. And letting somebody else do that, I think, means going serverless. We're so used to working with servers that we sometimes just forget that we don't have to. There's Cloud Functions, there's Cloud Run that lets you run containers, there's App Engine, working with servers. Now you don't just sit there and feel super busy, but you're actually productive because you're writing business logic instead of futzing around with servers or networks. Understand and love IAM. So is the next one. I hate IAM. IAM is, access management, something, I don't know. It has to do with roles and responsibilities and access, who has what level of access in your cloud project. And if that sounds boring, it is because it is super boring. But this is actually a big leverage point when we do cloud computing. And I'm trying to become better at this. Because recently I deleted thousands of accounts from a production database. I thought it was a test database. And that, of course, people make mistakes. I make maybe more than most. But that I shouldn't have had access to delete those production accounts. So really with IAM, that is setting up roles and access. We think we're protecting ourselves from hackers. That's not what this is. This is protecting ourselves from mistakes, stupid mistakes, like the Martin in your organization going in and deleting thousands of accounts. Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. People are stupid and do stupid things, and IAM is the guardrails that are there to help them. So study IAM. It's super boring, yes, I know, but study it, get to know it well, and set up your environments just right so that you have one production environment, production, developers can't read data, they can't write data, of course. Test, maybe they can do a little more. Developer environments, they can do even more. Maybe they can change settings and things like that. And set up IAM to actually enforce that. Don't trust people to, don't delete stuff from the production database. That was the second quarter. Lloyd, do we have any questions or comments?
No, nothing has come up. Let me double check the other chat here. No questions from the crowd.
Okay, excellent. We'll continue. Next one, we're going back in time. So before there was 1920s and smart people who lived then, there was the antiquities, the way back when. There was a very smart guy named Diogenes. He was the co-founder of the Cynic philosophy. But he said, we have 2 ears and 1 tongue so that we would listen more and talk less. And of course, this is very easy to say. When building applications, we should listen more. But how do we actually do it? We need to listen to our users. And I have found 3 ways that through hard experience, I found 3 ways that have worked out well for me and for customers I've been working with to listen to users. So the first one is to provide a way for users to send you feedback with 0 friction. Because this happened, right? I had a feature in a cloud application that I built that worked great for me because I had a developer account. It worked for nobody else. There were like 1 person it worked for, Martin. There were 7 billion people in the world that this feature did not work for. But I didn't know because all my tests ran fine. And I would never have known if I hadn't had a feedback. After a while, I added a feedback form. I should have done this way sooner. So there should be a super easy way for somebody to just click, maybe click, take a screenshot, or click and write a short little text blurb and tell you when things go wrong. Because you're not going to be able to put tracking and error tracking around this or predict everything. Or predict even all the weird behaviors users have. They will tell you interesting things, like I like to do it in this order, but your application is set up in this other order. So there are a few cool things you can do. You don't, of course, have to build anything, forms or things for this. There's Google Forms, super easy to use. As a matter of fact, if you're doing a web application with just a little bit of JavaScript, you can even capture the user's browser user agent string. So then now not only do you know that users say that this thing is broken or that page is out of whack with the UI, you also know that, oh, this is people with Internet Explorer who say that, or only people with the latest Chrome version, not with earlier Chrome versions. Next one is track all user actions or shadow your users. So they are in your application, inside, now we're talking your client application, inside your mobile native app, or inside your web application. You can track everything they do. And you should, in a non-creepy way. So whenever I now have a rule, I didn't follow this, but through hard experience, I discovered this rule. Whenever I add a new button to any interface I build, I add a Google Analytics event around that button. Now I can see how many people click the login button, how many people then click the Facebook login, how many people then come out of Facebook login, for example, with success. So I have a little funnel going. And this, I put this in place. I should have done it from the beginning, but I eventually discovered that I should have put this in because Facebook login just stopped working. No users told me. I couldn't have an alert go out every time a Facebook login failed because, they failed for all kinds of reasons. But setting up tracking, every click, every action becomes something in Google Analytics that you can analyze. And then you use that data to inform your developer priorities. So, so you know what to work on, what features to work on, which ones not to. Also track client errors from mobile apps or from web applications. Catch those exceptions and track them on the server because you're not really seeing them. You're not running the client. The way to do this is to check out Google Analytics, of course, Firebase Crashlytics. First is good for web apps and mobile apps. Firebase Crashlytics is great for detecting when your mobile apps crash and track all that on the server. Those are free. Those are easy to set up. If you want to go on to sort of advanced here, you can go to more advanced topic products like LogRocket, for example. I really like this. There are a few products that do similar things. Basically, they record what all the users are doing. So you see their little mouse button, mouse cursor move around. You see every time they click. You see when they scroll. It's sort of like looking over the shoulder of your users. And then they have excellent privacy tools as well. So like personal identifiable data isn't captured and so on. But this has been eye-opening for me. LogRocket and similar tools tend to cost money. So first, do a really good job on setting up Google Analytics and Firebase Crashlytics. And then you can move on to the paid tools. Speaking of personal data, you may not need that personally identifiable information. Plenty of times we just track, people's email addresses or locations or IP addresses or phone numbers because it's easy to do and we have the data. But that is scary. I mean, I wrote one app where I ended up with hundreds of thousands of email addresses in the database. This was super scary. If there had been a database breach, thank heavens there wasn't, I would have had to figure out all these different places where do these people live. California has laws around, I have to tell these users that there was a data breach, exactly what data was released. Europe has other laws. PII, personally identifiable information, is a liability. You want as little of that as possible. Sure, maybe the people who work in marketing or whatever, other teams in your organization will want to suck in all the data they can. Just be aware, just make them aware that there's a cost to that and things will move slower. You will need to deal with GDPR. You will need to, it becomes super important who can view the database. Developers shouldn't be able to, which makes it harder for them to troubleshoot production errors. You may need to assign a data protection officer. Well, you probably will, actually. If you don't have personally identifiable information in your database, all of these problems go away. And if you have a little PI in your database, you have small problems. If you have a lot of PI in the database, you have big problems. Big companies shoot themselves in the foot about this all the time. That doesn't mean that you have to shoot yourself in the foot. So the way you can avoid PII, I have found, is that these modern single sign-on solutions, they let you ignore PII. So for example, Firebase Login is great at this. And I'm sure many others, Auth0 and all of their others probably have similar features where you just say, let the user log in with their Google account or Twitter account. And then we just say, sorry, my phone. I should silence my phone. There. And then these, instead of giving you the email address of the user, you can just ask for a long identifier string that is just random numbers. So now you know that this is user 123, and you know that user 123 came in last week and saved this or put this in the cart or what have you. So you can find that user again, but you don't have to know all the phone number and IP address and shoe size of user 123. Less PI, less trouble. All right, that was the third quarter. How's it looking? Any comments or any questions out there, Lloyd?
Nope, where there's no real questions here. A quick comment, your mic, I think, is coming loose. So when you do big gestures, we get a little bit of a static from your mic rubbing on your shirt, I think. And now it disconnected your mic. So I might have made it worse. We'll get that sorted. But while you're getting that sorted, when you talk about some of these issues like adding usability tracking elements to the different buttons, or adding the different element, thinking of the workflow and capturing logs. But you've talked briefly, you mentioned for the security, for the PEII, naming us personal security data officer. What role would you say that falls to on a team for somebody tracking the usability and your second bullet point, item B in this section? And you're still muted. This is why I was worried to say anything about your mic. Oh, see, we could all just try and read his lips. Not yet. Let's see here. Let's see if I can force your mic on. No, I can mute you, but not unmute you. Can you, on your screen, on the, no, it does say mic on. Well, let's try this. Why don't you mute yourself on the Remo app and then unmute it? Oh, there's the button, unmute. See, now we've done it. I mute him, unmute. Still nothing. Well, how about this for a great? All right, Martin will be right back. We've got Q&A here. So everybody can do some stretches. Appreciate the space that Google has provided. We thank our sponsors. Here comes Martin.
Hello. Is there a cool?
So much better. And we can hear you. It's great. It's the best news of the day.
So, Lloyd, any other settings you would like me to update here?
Yeah, right. No, I'm good. No. Everything's great. Let's stop touching the AV here, people. You would think that as technologists, we would learn not to do that in production. But we do have one question while people were able to take a stretch. Jay is wondering, any tips on handling GDPR?
Yep, a couple. So one is that there are companies out there that help you put together a privacy policy, and we're not talking about hiring a lawyer or anything crazy like that, but you basically enter a bunch of things in a search in a web form, and they spit out a privacy policy, and they can even host the privacy policy on their website. You can also deal with like cookie banners in that way. So outsource as much as you can, and then when there's trouble, you can say, "Oh, I followed best practice in this company. Go and talk to them." You will, however, need to have a data protection officer, and that is messy, and you will need to have somebody sign up for that. Maybe it should be somebody in marketing, the people who are pushing for you to store all that personal identifiable data.
That's great. Thank you. Let's get back to your next section.
All right, let's see if this works. Yeah, sorry about the noise of the microphone before. I usually have a different setup, but then of course I changed everything minutes before going on stage. Best in production. All right. So the last thing, the last quarter of this talk is appropriately, this is about mistakes. So it turns out that a computer lets you make more mistakes faster than any invention in human history, with the possible exceptions of handguns and tequila. This was not a philosopher said this. This wasn't even I who said it. This is overheard at a party, but it is nevertheless true. There will be mistakes, and you just need to plan for failure. There will be failures, and sometimes I notice that companies or people, myself included, we put so much time into planning, trying to make everything perfect, that we don't plan for failure. We can't recover, or we should have spent more time on being able to recover. So backups. Plenty of us are, I've certainly been guilty of having good intentions rather than having backups. Because again, this was running an app with lots of users. I had to, when things break and data was lost, this is actually the incident a couple of slides ago when I deleted a bunch of accounts from the production database. Everything was crazy. Users are upset. I need to restore data. The way the data restoration job worked was not what I'd expected. So I ended up making more mistakes, making the situation worse. So here's what you do. One, you take backups. Okay, that's great. You still don't really have backups until you've automated the backups. First mistake, or we often do, we take backups manually every now and then. So you must automate them. Well, it actually turns out you're not really having backups yet, because to actually be able to say with a straight face that you have backups, you need to test the recoverability. And if you do that, maybe last day of every month, you have a procedure where, last Friday of every month, maybe you sit down and you recover the database from the day before, just to make sure everything works, to make sure the process works. Now you can actually say, I have backups. So the way to do this is, of course, Firestore, Cloud SQL, all these databases in the Google Cloud Platform. They let you back up to cloud storage, which is the sort of file area of your Google Cloud account. Automate those backups, test recoverability. So manually, you should then test that you can recover and get to know the system. Because when people are going crazy and data is lost and everybody's upset, that's not the time to figure out if your backups work or exactly how they work. Next up is code is a liability. And you shouldn't really have any of this. And sometimes people don't like to hear this because producing code, that is what we do all day. But we're really producing liability all day. So here's an example. I started designing I started writing code to send an alert if the number of users in my web system dropped below a certain threshold. All right, so that was great. I figured I can do it in a few hundred lines of code. Well, it turns out I could just connect my Google Analytics with stats glitch, that's some startup out there that they have a service to detect anomalies in Google Analytics. I could connect that in turn with Phasier, which is great at sending alerts. Click, 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 click. 50 clicks later, I'd set this up with 50 clicks instead of 200 lines of code. And I avoided 200 lines of bugs, because we know that for every 100 lines of code you write, you create 3 bugs. Well, if you're me, it's more like 4 or 5 bugs. If you're super smart and smarter than most people in the industry, maybe you can get it down to 2.5 bugs per 100 lines. But all of that has to be debugged and maintained, and it can cause problems in other parts of the system. And you're just better off without this liability, without those extra lines of code. So the way to do this is that actually right now is a great time to avoid writing code, because there's so many startups out there that have surprisingly good tools, like StatsGlitch, Phasier. I'm sure there are hundreds of others that have similar great tools. Whatever you want when it comes to monitoring and alerting and things like that, there are lots of startups that have great products that are very affordable because they're all funded by venture capitalists. Use their products, don't write code. Finally, deployments. Oh, feature flags, yeah, and canary deployments. So this is something I learned the hard way as well. Maybe you've run into this as well. Finally, I was doing so many deployments for such silly little things and risky deployments just to change little things. So nowadays, whenever I write cloud applications, I try to store all the config values in a database. And the database, that I can update many times a day, like the color of this button, or is this feature, is this whole critical user journey turned on or off? That is all in the database. I don't have to change code to change the behavior of my front end. Because all the tests in the world means you can't find all the bugs anyway. So also rolling back is really hard to do. Let's say you deploy version 1.2 of your client, and then it breaks. Rolling back to version 1.1, I mean, it's very easy in theory, right? Maybe somebody who doesn't know programming will say, oh, just roll back. But you've just spent months building this factory of conveyor belts that are, produce code. And all of a sudden you're saying, oh, change the whole factory. Turn all the conveyor belts should run backwards. That is really hard to do and do right. Instead, what you do, of course, is you do canary deployments and feature flags. So when you roll out a new feature, you have a kill switch on that in the database. So if it didn't work out, turn it off with a database toggle instead of trying to roll back. So there's some cool product support for this in Google Cloud Platform. Cloud Run lets you split traffic by %. So you have version 1.2. Maybe start sending 1% of your traffic to that one, still 99% to your old 1.1 version. And over coming hours, days, weeks, you can send more and more traffic to the new version if it's stable. And if there are problems with it, you switch all of it back to the old version not by writing code, but by making a change in the UI. And this is of course how Google rolls out new code. So whenever there's a new Gmail update, for example, not everybody sees it right away. It's like 1% of people in Germany, or then a few people in the US, and then a few, and over time and over, it can take weeks for a Google rollout. And Firebase, they let you do remote config of mobile apps. So you can say the login button should be blue. Nope, I changed my mind. The login button should be red. Database change. Doesn't need to, you don't have to deploy new code. So with that, I encourage you all to experiment, embrace your inner artists, be mad scientists, be mad artists too, create great cloud apps for your users. Don't be afraid to mix things. Just make sure you take lab notes on what works and what doesn't. And I think the best in cloud computing is yet to come. And there's never been a better time to be a cloud developer. And with that, I'm open for a few minutes more of questions, if there are any. How's it looking, Lloyd?
It's looking great. We've got one question, which I think is great, and I have a follow-up, and I encourage people to add questions to the Q&A section of the chat. This one, which is it's a pretty hard hitting one. What do you wish you knew now, or what do you know now that you wish you had known sooner?
Ooh, wow. That's a good one. So I think each of the 10 items here is one of those. I guess if I had to pick one of these 10, I would say 2B, IAM. I really have shot myself in the foot multiple times in multiple jobs by not setting up the, not locking down access as much as possible. Everybody should have the minimum, bare minimum of access privileges. And it's a pain in the rear to set everything up, but it's even more painful when you, I mean, at multiple jobs, I've deleted the entire production database, for example.
I'm laughing because I'm sure I've heard of other people possibly doing that. But yeah, yes, that's a good piece.
It makes me feel better that hopefully I'm not the only one who deleted a production database.
No, and the idea of making sure that backup is not actually a backup until you've tested it to be stood back up is also that I would call that one out.
Yeah, it's amazing how one would think this would be a solved problem a long time ago, but we still have to test it.
So my question, I like that you starting with this artistic autonomy, and as you to automate that, if there were areas, what do you wish that you could spend more time doing in that area of artistic autonomy around building an app, and where you find the things most often coming up and biting you, or taking away from the time you would like to be spending doing that creative work?
Yep. Debugging for sure. I think we all feel in our bones that we spend, 10% on time, brand new code, and 70% is trying to track down hard to find errors. And then of course, even worse, maybe you don't even know there are errors because you don't have the right alerting. But I think that artistic autonomy, I also think that a lot of innovation can come out of engineering rather than out of product management or marketing or other sales, because marketing and sales and so on, those teams don't always know what's possible with technology. But if engineers have a little more autonomy and a little more artistic autonomy and a little more time, then they can do 20% projects. They can do crazy little things and little demos and show that to a product manager, and the product manager gets a great idea based on that, and there's this, and everybody's working together, and cool things happen. But of course, you never get there if all you're doing is chasing bugs from the last release.
Too true. Well, I don't see any other questions. So thank you so much, Martin. I think we're exactly right on time. So everybody be sure and fill out the survey feedback. Stop by our sponsors table and say hello there, and stop by we do have other floors, I will also say, and we have a representative from the GDG community up on floor 2. So try the other floors. We may have made too many floors of the Remo app than we had meant to. But we've got a 15-minute break, and we'll see folks on the floor or in the what do we call it? Virtual happy hour. So thanks again, Martin.
Thank you.
It can't be soon enough as far as I'm concerned.
Indeed.